The Kingdom Under the Sea and Other Stories by Joan Aiken. Read by Deirdre Edwards. The Kingdom Under the Sea. Once a fisherman lived on the lonely shore. Every day he went out to sea in his little boat and caught fish. Every night he cooked and ate the fish. So he lived. At last he said to himself, "Even the birds of the air and the fish of the sea have a better life than I, for at least they have companions. I will pray to Zora Giavodka, the Dawn Maiden, to bring some comfort into my life." So he rowed out to sea in his little boat, and for 3 days he neither ate nor fished, but let the tides carry him where they would. On the 3rd morning he saw Zora Giavodka, the Dawn Maiden, the sun's beloved daughter, coming swiftly over the waves in her silver boat. She looked upon the fisherman with kindness. "What grieves you, my son? Why do you look so sad?" "Oh, Zora Giavodka, beautiful Dawn Maiden, won't you please bring a bit of comfort and cheerfulness into my life?" "Well," said the Dawn Maiden, "for 3 days you have spared my fishes, so I will help you. Go home to your hut on the lonely shore, and wait for what fortune will come to you." So she sank beneath the waves in her silver boat, and the fisherman rowed home. When he reached his hut on the lonely shore, there was a poor ragged girl sitting outside the door. "My parents have died, and I have come to be your wife," she told the fisherman. "Is this all the fortune the Dawn Maiden has sent me?" he thought. But there was nothing to be done. He took her for his wife, and he thought again. Maybe she has rich kinsfolk who will come presently with gold and marriage gifts. But nothing of that sort happened, and matters went on as before. Every day the fisherman went out in his boat and caught fish, while his wife wove nets of hemp. Every night he ate the fish, with wild herbs and roots which the wife had gathered on the cliffside. But after they had eaten, she would take his head in her lap and comb his hair, or she would play sweet tunes on her pair of bone pipes. And she told him wonderful tales about the Sea King's palace, about the wind-swept Isle of Boujan, and the amber stone of Alatir, about Perun, the god of thunder, about the dragon of Lake Rikavats, and the Zmayevska-Vatra, the dragon's fire, which lies deep down below the round of the world. And the fisherman was comforted, for he thought, "Maybe she is really a fairy wife that the Dawn Maiden sent me. Maybe, in the course of time, she will show me all these marvels." Weeks went by, and months went by. In the course of time, they had a little son. And every day the fisherman went fishing, and every night the wife told her tales. But one night the fisherman became angry, and he said, "I will wait no longer. Tomorrow you must show me one of these marvels. Take me to the Sea King's palace and show me his throne of silver and his trumpets of pearl and his coral candles burning beneath the waves." Then his wife was frightened, and she said, "It is only a tale that I told you to ease your heart. I'm just a poor girl. What do I know of the Sea King's palace? How can I take you there?" But the fisherman would not listen to her. He said, "Tomorrow, at dawn, you must go out along the shore and find the way to the Sea King's palace. And if you cannot find it, do not trouble to return, for you will not be welcome." So the next morning, at dawn, the poor wife took her baby in her arms and set out along the shore. All day she walked, and never a soul did she see, let alone the way to the Sea King's palace. At nightfall she was tired, and lay down to rest. she fell asleep, and when she woke, her baby was gone. All next day she called and she hunted, but no trace of her baby could she discover, not so much as a footprint in the sand. So on the third day she turned homeward, for what else could she do? By the time she reached the hut, her hair had turned white, and she had gone dumb with grieving, so she could tell her husband nothing of what had happened. As for him, his heart was still set on finding the Sea King's palace, with its throne of silver and trumpets of pearl, and the coral candles burning beneath the waves. He could think of nothing else. So once again he rowed out to sea, and for 3 days neither ate nor fished. On the third day the Dawn Maiden rose again in her silver boat. "What troubles you now, my son?" "Oh, Zora Dievochka, beautiful Dawn Maiden, won't you please show me the way to the Sea King's palace?" "Very well," she said. "I will help you this time, but no more. At the next new moon, get into your boat and let the wind carry you eastwards until you reach the windswept isle of Bujan, the sun's bright home, where shines the amber stone Elatir, guarded by the eldest brother of all the crows. There I will tell you what to do next." So the fisherman went home. He said nothing to his wife, but at the next new moon got into his boat and let the wind carry him eastwards until he reached the windswept isle of Bujan, where the grass grows green and the grapes hang on the wild vines. And there Zora Dievochka, the Dawn Maiden, was waiting for him. "Do you see that mill-wheel floating in the waves, my son, with the mermaids playing round it? You must ask the mermaids to turn the wheel and whirl you down to the Sea King's halls. But mind, once you are down there, you will not be able to return, for 3 terrible guardians bar the way back to earth." "Oh, thank you, beautiful Dawn Maiden, but once I'm down there, I shan't wish to come back to earth." So the fisherman rowed along to where the mermaids were playing round the mill-wheel. "Dear mermaids, won't you please turn the wheel and spin me down to the Sea King's palace?" So the mermaids spun the wheel until there was a great funnel hole in the sea, and the fisherman's boat went riding down to the Sea King's palace. He saw the silver throne, the burning candles of coral, and the sea people blowing on trumpets of pearl. There was the great Sea King himself, with his tangled beard and his horns and his ruby eyes. And there, too, was the fisherman's little son, lying in a golden cradle. Well, when the fisherman saw his baby son, all thoughts about the splendor of the Sea King's palace went clean out of his head. "How dared they steal my little son and bring him down here?" he thought. "And how in the world am I going to get him home?" Now, while this had been happening to the fisherman, his poor dumb wife was left alone in the lonely hut. So what did she do? Every night she cooked the fisherman's supper, in case he should come back, and every day she wove nets of hemp. Then, since the fisherman did not come home, every morning she took his supper to the cliffside and fed it to the wild snakes. Every noon she took the hempen nets and gave them to the seabirds to build their nests. Weeks went by, and months went by, and still the fisherman did not return. But his boat came floating back, upside down. So the wife took her bone pipes and her bone fishhook. She stepped into the boat and put out to sea, and the wind carried her to a distant place where there are 3 caverns of cloud. In one is a dreadful dragon, in one a fearsome bird, and in one a monstrous bee. The wife came to the first cavern, and saw the dreadful dragon stretched out along the sea, shooting out foam and spume from her nostrils, lashing up the waves with her tail. The wife dared not go by, but took out her pipes and played on them. Directly she did so, all the snakes in the world came swimming. "Let the woman pass by your cave, Dragon Mother. She has done us many a kindness, and fed us every morning."
"Very well," said the dragon, "but only this once, mind."
So she let the woman's boat pass by. Next, the wife came to the second cavern, where there sat a fearsome bird, large as a mountain. Her feathers were of brass, and her beak of iron. When she clapped her wings, the hurricane blew. But the woman played a soft tune on her pipes. Directly she did so, all the birds in the world came flying. "Do let the woman go by, O mother of all the birds! Every day she has given us hemp for our nests."
"Very well," said the bird, "but only this once."
So she let the boat pass by. Now the woman came to the third cave, where lived the great bee. When it buzzed, the lightning flashed and the thunder pealed. But the wife caught the bee in her sleeve. With the bee in her sleeve, she rowed on into the unknown sea beyond, and she let down her little bone hook on its slender line. It was just at this moment that the fisherman was trying to escape from the Sea King's palace, struggling with the golden cradle in his arms to swim up through the great weight of sea that lay like a dome above. And as he struggled to swim, the woman's little bone hook caught in his hair and pulled him up. She drew both father and child to the top of the sea, and when she saw them, a spring of joy burst in her heart, and the power of speech returned to her. "Oh, my husband, my little son, that I never hoped to see again." So she helped them into her boat, and they embraced one another. But now all the people of the sea came in chase, the mermaids with their blue stone eyes, the foam spirits with their long white fingers, and the great horned Sea King himself. Huge waves rose, and the wind howled, and they still had to get past the dreadful dragon and the fearsome bird. In his terror, the fisherman called to the Dawn Maiden. "Oh, Zora Diovodka, beautiful Dawn Maiden, do help me just once more." The Dawn Maiden came in her silver boat, skimming over the waves. "I said I would not help you again," she told the fisherman. But on the woman she looked kindly, and she said, "Oh, faithful wife, to you I will give help." And she gave the wife a silken kerchief. Quickly they spread it out, and it became a sail. The boat flew over the waves, faster than the sea people could follow. It flew past the dragon's cave and past the fearsome bird. As they passed the third cave, the golden bee flew out of the woman's sleeve, and they saw the lightning flash and heard the thunder crack behind them. But the boat flew on, reached the shore, split on a rock, and sank. They waded ashore just below their lonely hut. From that day on, every evening to the end of his life, the fisherman ate his fish and his wild herbs in contentment. Never again did he wish to visit the Sea King's palace. The Imprisoned Queen. Once there were 3 brothers, kings, who decided to build a city and call it Skadar. They chose a spot by a river on the side of a mountain. They called 300 workmen together, and for 3 years they toiled at building the city. But what happened? Every night a Vila, a wicked fairy who lived in the clouds and mist up at the top of the mountain, caused the whole hillside to tremble and heave, so that the walls fell down, the stones fell apart, and all their work was to do again. At the end of 3 years, they were no further on. When the 4th year was beginning, the Vila called down from her hiding place in the clouds and mist.
Kings, you will never build your city of Skadar until you find a twin brother and sister, Storja and Storjane. You must tie them together and bury them under the great gate of the city. Then the walls will stand firm, the stones will cling together, and the buildings will not fall down at night.
King Vukushan, the eldest of the 3 brothers, had a faithful servant, Desimir. To this man he entrusted 6 wagon-loads of treasure and sent him off to wander the whole wide world, looking for a twin brother and sister, Storja and Storjane. "Find them," he told Desimir. "Buy them for slaves, trick them or kidnap them, but bring them back somehow so that we can bury them under the great gate and build our city of Skadar." Desimir set out with his 6 wagon-loads of treasure and was gone for 3 years. At the end of that time, he came back again.
"I have searched through the whole wide world," he told King Vukushan. "Not a town or village have I missed, but nowhere have I found a twin boy and girl named Storja and Storjane. So here are your 6 wagon-loads of treasure back again, King Vukushan."
Now, the truth of the matter was that Desimir had found Storja and Storjane the very first day after he had left the king. A beautiful youth and girl living not far from the fairies' mountain. He spent the night at their hut. They gave him soft water to wash in, bread and salt, and a clean, sweet bed. Next morning he thought,
"What have they done that they should be buried under the great gate of the city?"
So he said nothing to them, but went off and wandered about the world for 3 years, and then returned to King Vukushan. The 3 brothers went on trying to build their town of Skadar, and every night the stones fell apart and the buildings fell down. Then the Vila, the wicked fairy, called down from her hiding place in the clouds and mist.
Kings, each one of you is married to a wife. Whichever of those 3 wives takes food tomorrow to the workmen building the walls of the city, that one must be walled up in one of the pillars of the great gate. Then the buildings will stand firm, the stones will cling together, and you will be able to build your city of Skadar.
The 3 brothers were not very happy about this. Not one of them wanted to lose his wife, but King Vukushan said, "We are in the fairies' power. We must agree not to speak of this matter to our wives. Promise, my brothers. And whichever of our wives takes the workmen their food tomorrow, that one must be walled up in the great gate." In the end, his 2 brothers agreed. They promised not to speak to their wives
of what the fairy had said. But two of them, King Vukushan and his next brother, broke their word and told their wives. Only the youngest brother, Goiko, kept his word and said nothing of the matter to his wife. So the next morning, the queen, King Vukushan's wife, said to her sister-in-law, "Oh, my sister, dear friend, I feel so ill. My head aches as if it would split in two. Be a kind sister, and take the men their food today for me." The next brother's wife said she would do this, but she in her turn went to the youngest brother's wife and said, "Oh, my dear friend, my sister, I have such a pain in my arm and back. Be a kind sister, and take the men their food for me today." The youngest queen, Goiko's wife, said, "Willingly I'll do this for you. But what about my little boy, little Jovo? I have not yet given him his dinner, nor have I washed my linen and hung it out to dry." "Do not trouble your head about that. We'll do it for you." So Goiko's young wife took the workmen their food. When her husband saw her coming, his heart was wrung with anguish. But the two older brothers, without wasting a moment, seized her, tied her hands, and pushed her into a gap in the wall. Masons raised a barrier of stones in front of her. At first, Goiko's wife laughed, thinking this must be a joke. Then she began to cry, "Let me out! Let me out!" "No, you must stay there," said King Vukushan, "or we shall never build our town of Skadar." Then Goiko's wife begged the master mason, "At least leave a small gap, so that I can see my son Jovo when he passes by." So, unknown to King Vukushan, this was done. And every morning Jovo passed by and called, "Are you there, my mother?" And Goiko's wife replied, "Yes, my son, here I am." And a stream of her tears ran by day and night. Time went by, and Goiko died of grief. None of his uncles and aunts would look after the little Jovo, so the kindly brother and sister took him in, Stoja and Stojane. But when he was a man grown, he returned to the city of Skadar and the place where his mother was imprisoned. He called, "Are you there, my mother?" "Yes, my son, here I am." Then Jovo, with his club, knocked down the wall and let out his mother, and they wept and embraced, and he took her far away. But the fairy, the Vila, looking down from her hiding place in the clouds and mist, saw that Goiko's wife had escaped. Angered by this, she shook the mountain until the city of Skadar fell in ruins, and it was not rebuilt for 100 years. But where the queen's tears flowed down the wall, a little stream runs to this day. Baba Yaga's daughter. There was once a girl called Vasilisa, whose mother had died, and whose father married again. The second wife and her 2 daughters hated Vasilisa because she was so pretty and obedient, because her father loved her best, and above all, because she was much more skillful than they at making lace, at spinning, and at knitting stockings. So her life was an unhappy one. She had to do all the work of the house, dig the garden, fetch the wood, fill the water jugs at the village well, and make sure the hearthstone was hot. One time, the father was away on business, and the stepmother went out to a harvest festival. Before she left, she gave each of the 3 girls her task for the evening.
One was to make lace, one to knit stockings, and Vasilisa was to spin. The mother put out all the fires in the house and left only one candle burning. But, in secret, she told her daughters to blow the candle out after she had gone, and this they did. "Now what shall we do?" they said. "There is no light, and our work is not done. We must get a light from the Baba Yaga." "I shan't go," said one of the stepsisters, "for I can knit in the dark." "I shan't go," said the other stepsister, "for I can see by the light of my needles." Then they both said to Vasilisa, "You must go and get light from Baba Yaga," and they turned her out of the house. Now, this Baba Yaga lived in a hut in the forest, and it was said that she ate men up as if they were chickens. So Vasilisa crossed herself and went trembling among the trees. As she felt her way forward, suddenly a knight on horseback galloped past her. He was dressed all in white. His horse was white, and even his reins, and as he passed, it grew light. Vasilisa went a little farther, and a second horseman passed. His horse and saddle were red, and his clothes and even his reins. When he had passed by, the sun rose. Vasilisa went on, and another horseman passed by who was all in black, his cloak, his horse, and his reins, and night fell again. Now, Vasilisa came to the clearing where Baba Yaga's hut stood. The fence round the hut was made of human bones, and on the fence posts there were skulls glaring out of their eye sockets, and instead of the gate there were feet, instead of bolts there were hands, and instead of the lock there was a mouth with sharp teeth. And inside the fence there was a little hut standing on a cock's foot and turning round and round. Vasilisa went stony cold with fear, for the eyes in all the skulls glared at her. But she walked forward to the hut and called out, "Hut, stand still as you should, with your back to the wood." At that, the hut stood still, and the door opened, and a girl looked out. She was knitting a cloth with gold and silver thread. She greeted Vasilisa with a friendly smile and exclaimed, "Oh, my darling sister, I'm so happy to see you, for here I pass my days all alone. I shall be glad to give you rest and refreshment as long as my mother is not here. But when she comes back, woe to us both, she will eat you up." When she heard this, Vasilisa was even more frightened, but she said, "Oh, my sister, let me in, I beg you, for I have been sent to fetch a little fire." "Well, I will let you in," said Baba Yaga's daughter, "and we will think what is best to be done." So she let in Vasilisa, set her by the fire, and gave her food. The two girls were very happy together. They sewed, they knitted, they talked, they laughed, and they combed their hair. Suddenly they heard a terrible noise outside in the forest. The tree branches creaked, and the dry leaves rattled, for Baba Yaga was flying back over the trees in her pestle and mortar. Quick as a flash, Baba Yaga's daughter turned her visitor into a needle and stuck her into the birch broom and set her on one side. Baba Yaga came in, and her eyes were gleaming like coals of fire. Her legs were of wood, and her nose was so large that it touched the ceiling. She stretched her jaws beyond measure.
"Tell me, my little one, my daughter, why do I smell human bones?"
"Mother, an old man came past who wanted a drink of water."
"Why did you not keep him?"
Mother, he was old and tough. You would not have enjoyed eating him." So Baba Yaga lay down and slept. Some hours later, out she went again, flying in her mortar and rowing it with a pestle, for it was day, and the glimmer in the skull's eyes had dimmed. Then her daughter ran quickly and let Vasilisa out of the birch broom, and as before, the two girls sewed, talked, laughed, and combed their hair. "Tell me, my sister," said Vasilisa, "who was the white knight that passed me in the forest?" "He was the bright day." "And who was the horseman all in red?" "That was the red sun." "And who was the horseman all in black?" "That was the dark night. They are all three my mother's servants." Then they heard a terrible whistling and crackling in the forest. Baba Yaga was returning, so her daughter made haste and turned Vasilisa into a needle once more, and stuck her into the birch broom. Baba Yaga came in, her eyes gleaming like red coals.
"Daughter, my little darling, why does the house smell so of human bones?"
"Two old men passed by and wanted to warm their hands. I tried to make them stay, but they would not."
"Next time, be sure you make them stay,"
said Baba Yaga. And then she lay down and was soon snoring. Next morning, when the glimmer in the skull's eyes had died away, she went off as before, flying in her mortar and rowing it with a pestle. Then her daughter made haste and let Vasilisa out of the broom. The girls set to work, sewed, talked, laughed, and combed their hair. But they forgot how time was flying by, and suddenly Baba Yaga stood before them. She seized Vasilisa and cried,
"Daughter, my little one, heat the oven quickly, make it very hot."
There was nothing for it. The daughter had to bring in logs of oak and pine, light the stove, and heat up the oven. Then Baba Yaga took her broad wooden shovel and said to Vasilisa,
"Sit on the shovel, dear child."
Vasilisa did not dare disobey, but she stuck her feet out sideways so that they came against the wall of the hearth.
"Not like that, my little one."
"How then, Baba Yaga?" And Vasilisa stuck her feet out on the other side.
"Will you sit still, girl?"
But Vasilisa could not seem to understand how Baba Yaga meant her to sit. At last the witch became angry and said,
"You are simply wasting time. See, you must sit like this."
Down she sat on the shovel, with her knees up to her chin. The two girls instantly shot her into the oven and shut the door, took their knitting, their comb and brush, and ran out of the hut. As they passed through the gate, Vasilisa took one of the skulls. Then they ran, and they ran, but when they looked back, Baba Yaga had managed to burst her way out of the oven, and was running after them, calling out,
"Ho, ho, ho!"
So the girls threw the hairbrush behind them, and at once a dense thicket grew up. It took Baba Yaga a long time to struggle through the bushes, but at last she did so, and came after them as before, crying,
"Ho, ho, ho!"
Then they threw the comb behind them. A thick, dark oak forest grew up, and before she could fight her way through it, Baba Yaga had to tear up each tree with her teeth. But at last she came out on the other side, and ran after them as before, calling out,
"Ho, ho, ho!"
Then they threw the piece of gold and silver knitted cloth behind. and it turned to a great marsh. Baba Yaga started to cross it, but she sank, first up to her knees, then to her waist, then to her chin. Then she sank out of sight and was never seen again. The two girls ran on until they came to Vasilisa's home. There was no light in the window, so Vasilisa knocked and went in. "There you are," said her stepsisters. "Why have you been so long? Ever since you went away, we have been unable to get the fire to burn. Even if we borrowed a light from the neighbours, it went out as soon as we brought it in." "Perhaps your fire may burn," said the stepmother. So Vasilisa brought in the skull, but the fire from its eyes darted out and burned the stepmother and stepsisters to cinders. Then Vasilisa buried the skull in the earth and called in Baba Yaga's daughter, and the two girls lived together happily, sewing, talking, laughing, and combing their hair. The Reed Girl. There was once a king who decided that it was time for his son to marry. But the young man, when asked about it, said that if he must marry, he would not take any poor skeleton of a girl, but that his wife must be the most beautiful creature on the whole round of the earth.
"Well, my son, but where is she to be found?"
"Perhaps the wise woman will know." So they asked the wise woman.
"She lives far from here," said the wise woman. "As far from here to there, and from there back."
"Where is that then, mother?"
"You have heard of the Black Sea, perhaps. In the 74th island of the Black Sea, right in the middle, are hidden 3 reeds. It will be very hard to find them, for there is such a darkness on the islands of the Black Sea that a spoon might stand up in it. Moreover, those 3 reeds are guarded by a witch whose life will end when they are cut down. But in one of those reeds is hidden a girl on whom the starry sky would gaze with smiles, for she is the most beautiful creature in the whole round of the earth."
"Very well," said the king's son, when he had heard all this from root to branch. "I will go in search of that reed girl." And he saddled a horse and set off over 49 kingdoms and beyond the Operencia Sea, until he came to a hut where lived an old woman. "Old mother, can you tell me where the reed girl is to be found?"
"No, I cannot," said the old woman. "But I will call my servant, who will take you to my sister. Maybe she can help you."
And she called,
"Here, Mitzi, Mitzi."
The king's son followed Mitzi, who was a small mouse with very long whiskers. So they came to a hut where another old woman lived. "Old mother, can you tell me where the reed girl is to be found?"
"No, my son, but I will call my servant Pizzi to take you to my sister. Maybe she will know."
Pizzi, who was a dove-white squirrel, took the king's son to the hut of the third old woman. "Good day, dear old mother."
"It's a good thing you addressed me so politely, or I should have eaten you. What are you doing in this strange land, where even the birds do not fly?"
"I am looking for the reed girl."
"If you wore iron boots on your feet, you would wear out 12 pairs of them before you found her. You need a horse that has sucked dragon's milk and eaten glowing coals.
Where can I find such a horse?
Happily for you, said the old woman, I see 3 golden hairs growing on your head. Some fairy must have been in love with your father. Climb the high mountain behind my hut and strike 3 golden hairs with this latch string.
So the king's son climbed the mountain, pulled out his 3 golden hairs, and struck them with the latch string. A fiery cloud rushed towards him, and down from it leapt the horse that had sucked dragon's milk and eaten glowing coals. The latch string became a marvellous saddle made of fur, with diamond buttons and silver embroidery. "Climb on my back, then, dear master," said the horse. "Shall I go as fast as a whirlwind, as fast as thought, or as fast as a bird?" "Go as you choose, dear horse." "Very well, but as we are going to the islands, where there is such a darkness that a spoon might stand up in it, we must first go to the bright home of the sun and ask for one of his rays." So they flew across the sky until they came to the doors of the world, where 2 bearded wolves mount guard. These would not let the travellers pass without payment of 2 pounds of flesh. So the king's son cut off his hand and threw it to them. Then the horse carried the king's son to the wind-swept Isle of Boujan, the bright home of the sun. Here they met Zora Dievochka, the Dawn Maiden, the sun's beloved daughter. She gave the king's son honey to eat, and played to him on a golden zither, whose strings she brushed with a silver feather. Her music was so beautiful that his hand grew again from the stump. Then the Dawn Maiden gave him one of the sun's burning rays. She wound it up like a ribbon and put it in a box which she hung round his neck. The king's son mounted his horse again, and they rode on for 7 days until they came to the islands of the Black Sea, where there is such darkness that a spoon might stand up in it. Now he opened his box and took out the sun's ray. It gave light, but only to him. Not a created soul in the world could see him. He found the spot where the 3 reeds were growing, and at a single blow cut down all 3 with his sword. When he did so, a bitter cry was heard, and black blood flowed from the reed stumps. This was the death cry of the witch who guarded the reeds, and the blood was hers. Quickly the king's son mounted his horse again, and rode back over 49 kingdoms. But as he rode, a terrible curiosity began to rise up in him, and prick him like a gimlet. He longed and longed to know if there really were girls inside the reeds. So at last, when he could not bear it any longer, he stopped and split one of the reeds with his dagger. Out came a beautiful girl, fair as a pearl, but she sank on the ground, calling out, "Water, water! Give me a drop of water, only a drop, or I shall surely die." 1 drop of water is not much to ask, but the king's son had none at all. So the poor girl grew paler and paler. Her head dropped to the ground, and she died. Then the king's son was so sorry for what he had done that he would willingly have died too, if it would have brought her back to life. He dug a grave with his sword and buried the poor girl, planting the split reed above her. From it sprang a rose bush with 1 black bloom. A bitter weeping was heard from the 2 reeds that remained, and the king's son thought, "I caused the death of that poor girl. I broke off the flower and planted it in the garden of death." But if he had wept his soul away, it would have made no difference. So he mounted his horse and rode on. But now again a wicked curiosity rose up in him to know what was inside the second reed. At last he could resist the devil's prompting no longer. He drew his dagger and split the reed. Another girl came out, white as a pearl, crying, "Water, water! Give me a drop of water, only a drop, or I shall surely die." But the king's son had no drop of water to give her, and she drooped and died. At that, the king's son was so sorry that he nearly died himself. But the harm was done, so he dug a grave with his sword, laid the poor girl in it, and planted the split reed above her. From it sprang a beautiful rose bush, which blossomed with black flowers. And a grievous weeping came from the last of the 3 reeds. The king's son mounted his horse and rode on. Once more a terrible curiosity overcame him to know what the third girl looked like. He took out the last reed, looked at it, was going to split it, but his horse reached back and snatched the reed from him. So they flew until they reached the shores of a lake. By the water's edge, the king's son split the last reed, and a beautiful girl came out, so beautiful that her like has never been seen before or since. She cried, "Water, water! Give me a drop, only a drop, or I shall surely die." So he made haste and gave her water to drink in his helmet. They embraced and kissed, saying, "I am yours, and you are mine." Then the king's son took her home to his father's palace, and they were married, and lived happily for many years. The King Who Declared War on the Animals. Once there was a poor young nobleman who had nothing in the world but a ruined castle in the forest, a horse, and a hound. So he was obliged to go hunting every day in order to get his food. However, he looked after his animals with great care, brushing and combing them every evening, giving them the same food as he had himself, and chopping wood to make a fire so that they should be warm at night. In consequence of this, they loved him dearly. One day, the young lord went hunting with his hound in a densely thicketed part of the forest. He tied his horse to a tree outside this bushy patch and left him grazing. Presently, a fox came by and stopped to admire the horse. "My word, brother, you seem fat and glossy. Your master must look after you well."
"Indeed he does," said the horse. "Everything he has, I share."
"May I sit here for a while and keep you company?" asked the fox.
"By all means,"
replied the horse politely. So the fox sat down by him and chatted until the young lord came back with a stag which he had shot. He was rather astonished to see the fox and raised his gun, at which the fox exclaimed, "Don't shoot me, sir. Rather take me into your service, and I'll keep an eye on your horse for you while you're off hunting." "Good gracious, what a risky thing to leave a horse tied up here when there are so many wolves and bears in the forest." The young lord thought this was sensible advice. He allowed the fox to come home with him, running alongside his hound. And when they arrived back at the ruined castle, the fox was given a share of the supper and a place by the fire. "I certainly am in luck," she thought. Next day, while the young lord went hunting, the fox kept watch. Presently, a hungry bear came along and began to sniff round the frightened horse. "Hey, you bear! Leave the horse alone!" called out the fox.
If you will only sit down patiently and wait, our master, who is the most generous man in the world, will certainly give you a good supper when he comes back. Isn't that so, horse?" "Yes, indeed," said the horse, who was sweating with anxiety. "Everything he has, we share." So the bear sat down and waited, and when the young lord returned, he was persuaded to take the bear into his service. The bear had supper and a bed for the night, and next morning he helped the fox mount guard over the horse. While they sat and chatted, a mouse ran up to them. "Be off!" shouted the bear. "Can't you see you're making the horse nervous?" "Oh, kind sirs, please let me stay with you. Life is so dreadfully hard in the forest these days, and you all look so well fed and contented." "But what can you do for our master?" said the bear in disgust. "Oh, I dare say I can make myself useful in some way," replied the mouse. "It isn't everyone who can go through a keyhole after all." So, when the young lord came back, he was persuaded to take the mouse too into his service. Next day, a mole asked to be allowed to join them. "Really," said the fox, "I fail to see what use a miserable little blind mole can be." "Oh, you'd be surprised how much I can do," said the mole. "Why, I and a few of my friends can plough up a field as fast as 2 men and 2 teams of horses." So the mole was permitted to go home with them and share their food and fire. Next day, a great buzzard asked if she might join them. "I am extremely strong," she said. "I can pick up a horse and rider in my talons and carry them right across the forest." A wild cat came by. "I can amuse you all with my purring and my playful ways." So the cat and the buzzard were added to their company, and the young lord looked after them, fed them, and kept them warm, and they were all exceedingly fond of him. But one day, when the lord was off hunting, the fox said, "Friends, we are all happy and contented, but our master seems rather sad and downcast. It has come into my mind that he needs a wife, one of his own kind, to keep him company. Where can one be found?" "The other day, when I flew over the palace of the king," said the buzzard, "I noticed that he has a very beautiful daughter. Why don't I fetch her to be our master's wife?" This seemed a good plan to them all. The buzzard flew to the king's palace, waited, perching in an oak tree, until the princess came out for her evening stroll, and then picked her up and carried her back to the forest, holding her as carefully as if she were made of rose petals. The young lord was overjoyed to see what a beautiful wife his friends had found him. Since he looked after her as carefully as he did the rest, the princess too was happy to share their life in the forest. But her father, the king, was angry and sad at the loss of his daughter. He asked a wise woman to find out what had become of the princess. The wise woman filled a bowl with water and looked into it. Then she said,
"Your daughter is living in the forest with a young nobleman. If you will give me half your treasure, I will fetch her back for you."
"Very well," said the king. So the wise woman, taking a whip in her hand, seated herself on a small carpet and lashed it with the whip until it rose in the air and carried her to the forest. There she saw the princess, walking outside the ruined castle, with all the animals keeping guard over her.
"Would you like to listen to some fine stories?" said the wise woman. "I know stories about heroes, stories about magicians, stories about birds and beasts, summer and winter, the sun, the moon, and the stars.
The princess was very fond of stories, so she was eager to listen to the wise woman.
Sit beside me on my carpet, then, and I will tell you about the golden apple and the 9 peahens.
But when the princess sat down beside her on the carpet, the wise woman snatched up her whip and lashed the carpet with it. Next minute they were far away, flying back to the king's palace, and the king shut his daughter in a tower, lest she be stolen again. The poor young lord was grief-stricken at the loss of his bride, and the animals were very downcast in sympathy. "Friends, we must get her back," said the fox. "You, cat, must go and play about in the garden of the tower, but don't let the princess's women catch you." So the striped cat made her way to the garden of the tower. There she played most beautifully, pouncing on leaves and grasses as they blew in the wind, pretending to chase her own tail. "Oh, the pretty creature!" exclaimed the waiting women. "Let us catch her to amuse our mistress." But try as they would, they were unable to catch the cat. "Let me out, just for a moment," called the princess, who was watching from the window. "I'm sure she will come to me." "Only for a moment, then," said the women, "for if the king, your father, knew, it would be as much as our place was worth." So they undid the door, and the princess stepped into the garden. And the buzzard, who had been waiting hidden in the branches of an oak tree, swooped down, picked her up as carefully as if she were made of rose petals, and carried her back to the forest. The king was furious at being tricked again, and by nothing more than a pair of animals at that. In his rage, he declared war on the whole animal tribe, swearing that he would exterminate the lot of them and recapture his daughter at the same time. So he collected a huge army with men, horses, and guns, and following the wise woman's directions, set out for the forest. "Now, what are we going to do?" said the bear. "We must defend ourselves as best we can," said the fox. "Each one of you must call as many companions as possible. I myself can summon 500 foxes. How about you?" she asked the bear. "Oh, I think I can count on about 100, said the bear. "And you, dear cat?" "About 800, said the cat. "And you, little mouse?" 8,000 for sure. "And you, friend mole?" "Oh, 3,000 at least." "And you, oh great buzzard?" "I fear not more than 200 or 300. So each animal went to fetch his companions, while the fox made a plan of battle. The king's army marched until nightfall. Then they made camp. But during the night, the mice invaded their camp and gnawed through all the halters, saddle girths, and reins, while the bears, foxes, and cats growled and howled round the outskirts of the camp, with a sound fearful enough to make your blood run cold. The king's horses, finding their halters cut through, made off in terror. Next day, not a horse was to be seen. "You must continue on foot, then," said the angry king to his soldiers. "You'll have to pull the great guns yourselves, since there are no horses." So they went on with great difficulty. Next night the mice came again, and gnawed through the soldiers' belts and sword straps, so they had no means of keeping their swords and their breeches on. Moreover, the moles dug hundreds of tunnels under their line of march. When they tried to stumble on, the heavy guns sank up to their barrels in the ground. Meanwhile,
The buzzards hovered overhead, hurling down great rocks on the struggling men. "Oh, well, let us turn back," said the king at last. "I can see God himself must be against us, since I have declared war on the animals. I will just have to give up my daughter." So he went back to his palace and sent a message telling the princess that she and her husband were forgiven. And they came to the palace with all their animals and lived happily together for many years. The Venetian Princess. There was once a Venetian princess, Roxanda, who was said to be marvellously beautiful, and the Tsar Dusan of Serbia wished to seek her hand in marriage. But when he sent his ambassador to see if she were indeed as beautiful as men told, the Venetians would only show him the princess at nightfall in an unlighted room. Luckily, the ambassador had with him his master's ring. By the light of the diamond in it, he was able to see Roxanda, and he returned to tell Dusan that she was indeed a girl on whom the heavens might smile. So Dusan sent to her father, King Michael, to know when he might come to fetch her, and how many svats, how many armed lords, he might bring with him. King Michael sent word, "Come when you choose, dear friend, and bring as many svats as you please. Only do not, I beg, bring those two troublemakers, your nephews, Peter and Vanka Sheen, the Voinoviches." So Tsar Dusan called together all his svats and set forth. When the brilliant wedding procession passed through the field of Kosovo and by the castle of the Voinoviches, the king's two nephews said sadly to one another, "Our uncle must be angry with us, or surely he would have invited us to go with him. May 100 evils befall him who has spoken against us. Our Tsar is going among the false Venetians. Alas, what will become of him without us to defend him?" Then their mother said, "O my sons, send and fetch your youngest brother Milosh, who guards the sheep in the mountains. The Tsar has not heard tell of him, and won't know him. Maybe he will be allowed to join the wedding procession." So Milosh was sent for, and he gladly agreed to go. "If I were not willing to aid our dear uncle, it would be a strange day indeed." He put on a white silk shirt, all embroidered with gold. Over the shirt he placed 3 thin, elegant ribbons, then a scarlet velvet waistcoat adorned with 30 gold buttons, and then his golden armour. Over it all he flung the coarse black cloak of a Bulgar shepherd, and placed on his head a Bulgar's black fur cap with high points, so that his own mother would not have known him. And he took his weapons and mounted the famous horse Kulash, on whom Peter had fastened a bearskin so that he would not be recognized. When Milosh caught up with the gay procession of knights, they hailed him. "Where are you going, little Bulgar?" "I have been serving the Turks, and am looking for better employment. May I join you?" "Indeed you may." So Milosh joined the procession. Now, being a shepherd, he was accustomed to doze at noontime, and so he fell asleep, and his hand relaxed on the rein. The great horse Kulash galloped forward to join the Tsar's horses, and fell into step with them. Milosh awoke then, and reined back his horse. The great Kulash bounded up to the height of 3 lances. Fire burst from his mouth, and blue flame from his nostrils. All the Svats were astonished, and said among themselves, "Such a horse has never been seen, save in the stable of the Voinoviches. It is strange that it should belong to that black Bulgar." Now they came to King Michael's white city of Ledian, and raised their tents beneath its walls. And King Michael sent a haughty message. "Listen, O Serbian Tsar, our champion waits in the valley, and you or one of your svats must overcome him before you may take the Princess Roxanda." But none of the Tsar Dushan's svats was willing to fight the Venetian champion. Then Dushan was so cast down that his moustaches drooped to his shoulders. He exclaimed, "Woe is me! If I only had my 2 darling nephews, I should not lack a champion." "Oh, mighty Tsar, have I your leave to fight this combat?" said Milosh. "Indeed, you are welcome, O youthful Bulgar, but I am afraid there is little chance of your defeating King Michael's champion." Milosh leapt onto the great horse Kulash and rode off, with his lance turned backward over his shoulder. King Dushan called, "Oh, my son, do not carry your lance so, or the proud Venetians will mock you." But Milosh replied, "Oh, my Tsar, do you look after your own dignity, and I will look after mine." All the Venetian ladies laughed as Milosh approached. "What a champion to send forth! Look at the ugly black Bulgar. Why, he's not even wearing respectable clothes." But Milosh reversed his lance and flung it so hard that it pinned the Venetian champion to the gate of the city. He struck off the champion's head and threw it in Kulash's nosebag. The Tsar Dushan was overjoyed. "For this, my son, I shall give you much honor." Now the Venetians sent another message. "In the meadow are 3 horses, each with a flaming sword point upright in its saddle. Before you can take the Princess Roxanda, you or your champion must leap at one bound over these horses and flaming swords." But none of the Serbian svats was willing to attempt such a feat. Then Milosh said, "Oh, my Tsar, have I your leave to try?" "Certainly, you may, dear son. But before you go, won't you please take off that clumsy Bulgarian cloak? May God punish the stupid tailor who made it." But Milosh replied, "Sit in peace, mighty Tsar, and drink your cool wine. If a sheep finds her wool too heavy, there is no sheep in her, nor any wool." He approached the 3 horses, and dancing first on one foot and then on the other, ran like a deer, leapt over the 3 horses, over the flaming swords, and alighted on the saddle of his own horse, the great Kulash. Then he rode in triumph to the Tsar. Now King Michael sent a message. "In front of the king's palace are 3 beautiful girls. Unless you can guess which of the 3 is Roxanda, neither you nor your svats shall leave this place alive." The king at once called his ambassador, but he declared that he would be unable to recognize Roxanda after having seen her for such a short time, and that only by the light of his master's ring. "Alas!" exclaimed the Tsar, "must we return without the bride, to the shame of our people?" Then Milosh said, "Have I your leave, O Tsar, to try to guess which is the princess?" "Indeed you have, O darling son, but I fear there is small chance that you will guess correctly, never having seen Roxanda." "Do not worry, glorious Tsar. When I was a shepherd, I could easily tell out of 300 lambs born in a night which lamb belonged to which mother. It will be easy to tell Roxanda from her likeness to her brothers." "Go then, my darling son. If you guess right, I shall give you the whole land of Skender." Milosh went to where the three girls were waiting. He swept off his black fur cap and his heavy cloak, revealing the scarlet velvet and golden armour which had been hidden beneath. Laying his cloak on the ground, he threw on it gold rings, pearls, and precious stones. Then he unsheathed his sword and said to the girls, "Let the Princess Roxanda roll up her sleeves and collect these precious things. But if either of the others should dare to touch them, I shall cut off her arms at the elbows." 2 of the girls were terrified and looked pleadingly at the third. So Roxanda gathered up the precious stones. The other girls would have fled then, but Milosh took their hands and gently led all 3 into the presence of the Tsar. One of the 2 companions went with Roxanda to attend her. The other agreed to marry Milosh. Now the wedding procession started homeward, but in the middle of the plain of Kosovo, Milosh came to take leave of the Tsar. "May God be with you, my dear uncle. My way lies to the right." Only now did the Tsar discover that the Bulgar was none other than his nephew, Prince Milosh Voinovich. "Oh, my darling boy, happy is the mother who gave birth to you, and happy the uncle who has such a courageous nephew. Why in the world did you not reveal yourself sooner?" Woe to him who overlooks his own relations. The Pear Tree. Long ago, near the beginning of things, when the earth was almost all covered in forest, God sent down the angel Gabriel to see how people were getting along and if they had enough to eat. There were 3 poor brothers living at that time who owned nothing in the world but one pear tree. This tree, though, was as beautiful as a miracle, for it was very tall and bore leaves, flowers, and fruit all at the same time. The leaves were green as emerald, the flowers white as snow, and the pears fine, large, and glossy, big as your 2 fists put together. And the tall tree arched over at the top in a graceful curve like a shepherd's crook, as if it were looking down to admire itself. Well, the angel Gabriel disguised himself as a poor beggar and walked through the forest until he came to this pear tree. The eldest brother was lying under the tree, keeping guard over it to make sure nobody stole the fruit, while the other 2 took some pears to market.
"Oh, kind sir," Gabriel besought him, "I'm so tired and hungry from travelling through the forest. Could you spare me just one of your beautiful pears?"
"Certainly, poor old man," said the eldest brother, and he picked a basket full of the pears and gave them to Gabriel. "These are from my share of the fruit," he said, "for I can't give you the pears that belong to my brothers." Next day, Gabriel returned to the tree. This time the middle brother was keeping guard over it, while the other 2 carried some of the fruit to market.
"Oh, kind sir," begged Gabriel, "could you give me a pear or 2, just to keep a poor old traveller from dying of hunger?"
"Willingly, you poor old fellow," said the middle brother, and he gave Gabriel some choice pears. "These are mine," he said, "for naturally I can't give you pears from my brother's share." On the 3rd day, Gabriel came again to the tree and found the youngest brother keeping watch, and he too, when asked, gave the angel some fruit from his share, explaining that he could not give away his brother's pears. Next day, Gabriel took the form of a monk and returned to the tree. This time he found all 3 brothers lying under it in the shade and talking together, while the white blossom fell on them like snow, for it was Sunday, and there was no market.
"Come with me, poor brothers," Gabriel said to them, "and I will give you a better life."
So, very much astonished, they followed him through the forest. Presently they came to a great waterfall. Here Gabriel said to the eldest brother,
"Because of your kindness to the poor traveller, you can make any wish and it will be granted."
"In that case," said the eldest brother, "I wish that this waterfall should all be turned to wine, and that the wine should all belong to me."
"Your wish is granted,"
said Gabriel, making the sign of the cross with his staff. And on that very instant the waterfall was turned to red wine, and there were men with staves making casks, men stoking furnaces to make bottles, men collecting the wine.
"All this is yours," Gabriel told the eldest brother. "See you put it to good use."
And he went on his way with the other two. Next they came to a clearing in the forest, where they saw a great flock of doves.
"Now it is your turn for a wish,"
Gabriel said to the second brother.
"Ask for anything you like, because you gave some of your fruit to the poor beggar."
"In that case," said the second brother, "I wish all these doves could be turned to a herd of cattle, and I wish they belonged to me." Directly he spoke, Gabriel made the sign of the cross, and all the doves were turned into cattle. Moreover, there were herdsmen looking after them, and girls milking them, and women churning butter and making cheese.
"All this is for you," Gabriel said to the second brother. "You will be able to earn yourself a proper living."
And he went on his way with the youngest brother until they came to a long glade in the forest.
"Now," said Gabriel to the youngest brother, "it is your turn for a wish. What would you like?"
The youngest brother said, "I should like a good Christian girl for a wife."
Gabriel scratched his head at that. "You ask a most awkward thing," he said. "There are only 3 such girls in the world. One is married already, one has declared that she will never take a husband, and the third has 2 suitors after her as it is. However, we shall see what we can do."
So he took the youngest brother to the village where the good Christian girl lived. Her name was Melitza. When they entered her house, they saw that the table was already covered with gold and silver gifts from the other 2 suitors, with woven cloth, silks and velvets, and embroidered slippers and carved ornaments. All the youngest brother could put down for his gift was a basket of pears.
"What kind of a present is that?"
exclaimed the girl's father scornfully. But Melitza had seen the youngest brother and liked his looks. "Let it be decided this way," she said to her father. "Let each of them plant a vine, and I will marry the man whose vine first bears fruit." So this was done, and on the very next day fine grapes were found hanging on the youngest brother's vine. The girl's father could make no further objection, so the 2 of them were married directly and went to live in the forest. Gabriel went back and told God what he had done for the 3 brothers.
"Are you sure you did right?"
said God.
"Of course I did," said the angel Gabriel. "Well," said God, "we shall see. Leave them for a year, and then go back to find out how they're getting on."
At the end of a year, Gabriel went to visit the eldest brother. As before, he disguised himself in beggar's clothes and hobbled into the village which had sprung up round the river of wine. There were inns and stalls, shops, swings, and merry-go-rounds. All the money from these things went to the eldest brother. So Gabriel knocked at the door of his fine large house and asked for a cup of wine. "The idea! If I gave a cup of wine to every vagabond who came whining to my door, how do you imagine I would make a living?" exclaimed the eldest brother. "Be off, before I call the constables." Said the angel Gabriel at this, and he made the sign of the cross. Directly he did so, the whole village, shops, inns, stalls, and people, and the river of wine, all vanished away. Nothing remained but the waterfall dashing over its crag. "The good luck was not for you," Gabriel told the eldest brother. "You are better as you were before. Go back to your pear tree." Then Gabriel went to visit the second brother, who was now running a great farm, with dairies and butcheries where they sold meat, and tanneries where they sold boots and saddles, and all kinds of things made out of leather. Gabriel knocked at the second brother's door, and asked for a drink of milk. "A likely thing it would be if I were to give a drink of milk to every beggar who passed through," exclaimed the second brother. "Be off, before I set the dogs on you." Muttered Gabriel at this, and he made the sign of the cross. At once the farm, the cattle, the shops and stalls, houses and barns, men and women, vanished clean away. Nothing was left but a clearing in the forest, and a flock of doves, who rose up into the air, wheeled round, and flew off. "That good luck was not for you. I can see you are better as you were before," Gabriel told the second brother. "Go back to your pear tree." And he went on his way, scratching his head. Now he came to the youngest brother, who was living in a tiny hut in the forest with his young wife Melitza. They were so poor that they had to grind up the bark of trees to make flour for their bread. Gabriel knocked at the door and asked if they could give him a bed for the night and a bite to eat. "Willingly," said Melitza, and she put a loaf of bark bread in the ashes to bake. And she gave Gabriel a mossy stone to sit on and a pillow of leaves. But much to her surprise, when the bread was baked and she took it out, she found that it had turned to a beautiful large loaf of the finest wheat flour. "God be thanked," she said to her husband. "Now we have something better to offer our guest." And she put it before Gabriel on a wooden plate, and gave him a wooden cup full of water. But when they came to drink, they found the water had changed to wine. And in the morning, when they went outside the hut to speed the traveller on his way, they found that the poor little cabin had turned into a handsome mansion, with everything around it they could possibly need. So they lived happily for many years. Gabriel went back to heaven. "What about the other two brothers?" asked God. "Some people are best left alone," said Gabriel, and he looked down to where the eldest and the middle brother were lying peacefully under their beautiful tree, with its green leaves and its glossy fruit and the white blossom falling like snow. The Golden Fleeced Ram and the 100 Elephants. There was once a young man called Marco, who was lucky enough to own a very handsome ram with a golden fleece. Now, it so chanced that the king of the country passed through Marco's village, and he saw the golden fleeced ram and set his heart on it. But instead of setting about matters in a straightforward way and asking Marco if he would sell him the ram or let him have it as a gift, which Marco might well have done, for he was a good-natured young man, the king asked the advice of his prime minister, Milosu, who was Marco's uncle. Milosu had always disliked his nephew, and he thought this would be a first-class chance to get rid of him and take his farm.
"Set the young man some impossible task," he said to the king. "Then, when he fails, you can chop his head off and take the ram."
The king listened to this bad advice. He sent for Marco and told him, "You must plant me a vineyard and bring me wine from it in 7 days. Otherwise I shall have your head cut off." Poor Marco was very upset. He wandered out of the village and up the mountain, weeping and wondering what he could possibly do. When he had gone some distance from the houses, he met a mysterious little girl who suddenly appeared from behind a rock and said, "Why are you weeping, my brother?" "Oh, leave me alone," he snapped. "Go your way, in God's name. My trouble is nothing to do with you, and you certainly can't help me." "Maybe I can, just the same," she said. "There's no harm in telling me." And she persisted until he said, "Oh, very well," and told her what was worrying him. "Why, I think we can do something about that," said the little girl. "I don't think that is too much of a problem. Go back, have the vineyard marked out, and order it to be trenched in straight lines. Now, take these twigs of basil, put them into a sack, and for 7 nights you must sleep lying between the trenches of the vineyard, with your head pillowed on the sack." And the mysterious little girl picked a bunch of the sweet mountain basil, with its grey leaves like smoke, and gave them to Marco. As he could think of no better plan, he did what she told him. He ordered the land to be dug and trenched. He put the basil sprigs in a sack, and for 7 nights slept between the trenches. On the first morning, he found the vines ready planted. On the second morning, the leaves had begun to sprout. On the third, the vines had grown tall. On the 4th morning, they were in flower. On the 5th morning, small grapes had begun to form. On the 6th morning, the grapes were large and green. On the 7th morning, the grapes were ripe and ready for picking. Since it was the golden-fleeced ram the king really wanted, he was not at all pleased when Marco came before him on the 7th day, with a jug of sweet wine and a cluster of grapes in his handkerchief.
"Never mind," said the wicked Uncle Milosu. "That plan didn't work, but now we'll find him something really impossible to do. Tell him to build a tower out of 100 elephants' tusks."
Marco heard this order with despair. "Why," he thought, "in this country it is uncommon to see even 1 elephant. How can I ever expect to find 100? And he wandered out of the village and up the wild mountain, with tears running down his cheeks. He had not gone very far when the mysterious little girl suddenly appeared again from the dry gully of a mountain stream. "Why are you weeping, my brother?" "Oh, what use is it to tell you?" he said. "This time it is quite impossible that you should be able to help me." "Oh, well, you never know," said she. "In any case, you might just as well relieve your mind by talking the matter over." So Marco told her that he had been ordered to build a tower out of elephants' tusks. "Oh, I do not think that is an impossible task," said the mysterious child. "What you must do is this. Go back to the king and ask for 300 barrels of wine and 300 barrels of brandy. Have men with oxen drag the barrels up the mountain to a lake with a narrow outlet. Pour all the wine and brandy into the lake and make a dam so that it cannot escape. Then many elephants will come to drink from the lake, and they will become drunk
and fall down. Have carpenters ready to cut off their tusks. Then, at the spot where the tower is to be built, you must lie down and sleep for 7 nights with your head pillowed on the sack of basil. On the 7th day, the tower will be ready." This time, Marco believed the mysterious child. He went to the king and asked for 300 barrels of wine and 300 barrels of brandy, and for oxen to drag them up the mountain and men to dam up the lake. Sure enough, when they had dammed the lake and poured in all the wine and brandy from the barrels, hundreds of elephants came hasting through the mountains, having smelt the liquor from many miles away. They came down to the verge of the lake, and drank and drank. The wine and brandy made them joyful, and they began to dance, waving their long trunks and fanning each other with their great ears. They trumpeted gaily, and the ground shook, so that the people in the king's city trembled and thought the mountain must be falling down. Marco watched the elephants dance, and he thought to himself, "Why should these happy creatures lose their tusks, so that the king may have an ivory tower? What have they done to deserve such a fate?" And he pulled out the keystone of the dam. Down rushed all the wine and brandy, straight down the side of the mountain, so that the king and his palace and his wicked minister Milosu were all swept away. But the elephants went gaily dancing and trumpeting away over the mountains, through Romania and Georgia, through Turkey, Iran, and Afghanistan, until they came to their native land. And Marco went with them, riding on the largest elephant. As for the golden-fleeced ram, it escaped up the mountain, who knows where. As for the mysterious little girl, she was never seen again. The Goose Girl. One day, God and St. Peter were out taking the air together in the green countryside. St. Peter walked along silently for a long distance. Then he suddenly burst out, "It must be a fine thing to be God! My goodness, if I could only be God for a short time, even half a day, then I'd be content to be St. Peter forever after." God smiled at that. "Very well, my dear Peter. If you are so set on it, your wish is granted. Be God until nightfall." They went on a little farther, and ahead of them they saw a village. A girl was coming in their direction, driving a flock of geese in front of her. She shooed all the geese into a meadow, left them, and started back towards the village again. "Surely you aren't going to leave those geese unguarded?" St. Peter said. "Well, what? You don't expect me to stay with them today. It's a feast day." "But who will look after the geese?" "God Almighty." And off she ran. "Well, Peter, you heard what she said," God told him. "I'm sorry you can't come with me to the village feast. I should have been delighted to take you. But then the geese might come to harm. You are God until nightfall. I'm afraid it's your job to protect them." So Peter had to stay and mind the geese. Never again did he wish to be God.